everybody. How you doing? This is Mark from rhythmguitarlessons.net, and we are live here today. We have a special edition live. We actually have two guests today. Well, that's four. We have two. So before I bring my guests out, let me tell you about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about all different kinds of things related to rhythm, specifically rhythm in music. It's not necessarily has to do specifically with the guitar, but everything can be applied to the guitar. Things like agogic stress, harmonic rhythm of chord changes, changing time signatures, rhythm subdivisions, rhythmic density. A lot of these terms you may never have heard of before, but I can assure you, you've actually already heard them in music that you're familiar with. So you don't have to worry about that. So if you're in the chat right now, please let us know where you're from. We would love to know where everybody is coming from, everybody who's viewing it live. Even if you're watching the replay, you could still comment on that. All right. We got somebody from Fredericksburg, Virginia. I don't know. Tim Rampler, 68. Dave from Bristol, UK. All right. Good to see you guys here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to bring out one of my guests. It's somebody that I've known for a very long time. Actually, a guitar teacher of mine. So he is proficient in all things rhythm. He's the one who taught me a lot of what I know. His name is Tom Hess, and he is a master guitar teacher, and he operates the website tomhess.net. So let's bring him out. Tom Hess, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Very cool. Very cool. Mike Nevico.
I know Mike.
Mike Nevico is repping in Connecticut.
Yeah, we toured together with Mike.
Yes, we did tour together. Hey, Mike, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. All right. So that, like I said earlier, the second guest that we have is someone that I've known for a very long time. You've known her longer than me. And she is a songwriting coach and a brilliant musician in her own part. And she runs the website, let me get this right, songwritinglessonsonline.net. Deanna?
Hi there. Good
Deanna,
to see you.
How are
Thanks for
you?
having me. I'm very well, thank you. I'm looking
All
forward
right.
to
So this is
what I'm
cool.
gonna
The
learn
three of
from you
us
guys.
together like this.
Yes.
Just like old times. Just like old times. So I have to give credit where credit's due. Deanna was the source of the topic or the various topics that we're going to be talking about today. So I know that you said in an email to me, Tom Hess, great idea, Mark. And I'm like, well, actually, no, it was Deanna.
That is very gracious of you.
Yes. And it is actually a really good idea. So all of these various things that happen in music that affect mood and emotion, create tension, release, things like that. So I'd like to open this up. I want to actually ask Tom Hess, what is agogic stress? How is it used? And is there any examples in music that we might be familiar with?
Sure. Well, agogic stress, or you can call it agogic stress, I'm not sure of the pronunciation myself, is basically where you use duration, how long a note lasts, to create accent. Okay, so let's say you had a steady stream of eighth notes and it's just plodding along, etc. If all of the notes are articulated the same way, the dynamic level is the same, none of the notes are really accented because the dynamic level is the same, the articulation is the same, etc. But as soon as you allow one of those notes, or more than one, to sustain or ring longer than the others, that note is naturally accented simply because of agogic stress, where the note is lasting longer. So you hear it all the time. You often will hear it in tunes where, let's say there might be, I'll write it out for you. Let's say we're in 4/4 time, and we've got some the equivalent of 8 eighth notes. Okay. So if we do this, there's our 4/4 measure. And if we simply tie one of the notes over, so nothing is being articulated here, this note is ringing out for the duration of these two notes. This note is naturally accented. That doesn't mean you're going to play it harder or hit it harder. You could, but you don't have to. It will be accented through agogic stress because it is longer than all the notes around it. Okay, so and that's true anytime where you have a note that's longer than other notes, it's naturally going to be accented. Now, if you do this on in a part of the measure that is syncopated, okay, so going back to our example here, this is beat 1, this is beat 2, this would be beat 3, and that would be beat 4. This right here is the and of 2, okay? So this is now lasting the equivalent of a quarter note going across the division of the measure here. And it's just creating a natural accent. And because it happens off the beat, it's on the and of beat 2, that brings more attention to the fact that it's being accented. It's a really, really cool sound. You hear it all the time.
Cool. Very cool. Anything to add, Deanna?
Sorry, I muted myself. No, apart from the subject of where stresses are generally in lyrics is a very fertile ground for this whole area of using rhythm. So one of those stresses can be agogic, but there's going to be other kinds of stresses. And from a lyrics point of view, not that that's the only category of thought I have about all this, but the important thing is to establish where the stresses in the language are naturally. So all words have stress patterns in them. They have stressed syllables, and those stressed syllables are slightly longer than the others. So, for example, the word table, the stressed syllable is the first one. And if I exaggerate that a little bit and I go table, you can hear that that's clearly longer. So from a lyric point of view, wherever you are going to use, if you were going to use a agogic stretch, you would want to match it up with the longer syllables in a word. Otherwise it's going to feel kind of lumpy, but not in a good way. So if you said table, that would be like a bad place to have your agogic stress.
Yeah, yes. So you mentioned the agogic stress lyrically, but what other types of stresses do you use in your songwriting, like vocally? Because anything that's done vocally could be done with an instrument. So
I think there are some kind of simple things that can make a really big difference. So in a way, these are not limited to vocals, of course, like you point out. The things that are to do with language, I guess you would want to be, that's the main thing with stress patterns, but most people do that naturally. I mean, there's that Blink-182 song that's got rescue instead of rescue, but most of us are so used to how language is supposed to sound that we're naturally going to put those in the right places. But in terms of other ways that we can think about lyrics with rhythm and lyrics, one thing which makes a big difference is whether you come in on the beat right before the downbeat or after the downbeat. So where the strong beats in the bar are and where you're coming in, that makes quite a big difference. And I'm always, this topic really fascinates me. And in fact, I suggested it because I was personally, selfishly really interested in what both of you are going to say, because I think when you're writing songs to perform by yourself, you really want to make the most of all possible levers of contrast at your disposal. And I think it was Tom Hess in a previous stream talked about something called the familiarity trap, when you tend towards doing things that are familiar to you. And rhythm is one of those things that we don't notice how familiar it gets because we just naturally do it. And if we don't challenge ourselves to progress what we're able to do technically, we then, in terms of the performances that we're able to combine, we end up being limited. So even just something as simple as training yourself to be able to come in with a particular phrase on the beat, right after the beat or before the beat, displacing in where the pulse is and where the phrase is relative to the pulse, that's something that's really cool on guitar and for voice. And you don't have to use a whole ton of notes for it to sound really, really great. For example, if you, I was learning some pop bangers for a functions gig, and one of them was Rihanna's Only Girl in the World. And she's just got this one note melody for most of the chorus, which is just but she's got this really syncopated bit underneath. Make me feel like I'm the only girl in the world, like I'm the only one that you ever love. And if you just heard that with crunch, it could be like a metal pulse. I thought that was so interesting for a pop groove. And so she had this single note melody, but the phrases were not always coming in at the same point in the bar. There was like bam, bam, bam on the 1, 2, 3 of the first bar, and then they were highly syncopated. And then there was a relief when it came in on one again on the last line for the kind of closing phrase. So that's something that's really, really powerful, changing where it is that you're going to start the phrase in the bar, and whether you're doing it at the start of the bar, right before the start of the bar, in the middle of the bar, strong beats, weak beats. That's something that I think songwriters can deploy very effectively, both for where they're playing the guitar and for where the phrases are coming in vocally.
So I have a question. So in your experience with you performing just with yourself and a guitar,
Yeah.
these placement of where the vocals start, that way you're not competing with your instrument. Sometimes you're starting where the instrument is not being played or in a hole, or you let the chord change happen, or even just simply just not coming in on the downbeat of the next measure, just waiting that or coming in on the second beat.
Sure. And I think, you can decide, like if you had an arrangement where that, let's say it was a chorus that made use of that technique and it was going to come around a few times, maybe the first couple of times you'd let it really establish itself so that it was very clear what was happening. Third time it came around, perhaps you'd arrange the guitar part so it was now identical to the vocal part. So because everyone's hearing kind of the pulse is going to be implied because everyone's already heard it. So or you could have a different, simpler pulsing, I don't know, single note guitar line. Something else I really love in terms of, which I think you could call rhythmic tension in a way, is when you hold out, when you've played a chord progression. So people they've kind of heard how the harmony changes under a melody. And then later on, you do not play the whole chord progression. You like pedal on the root note and you just let that harmonic tension build and build and build. And then finally you give them the new chord. That is a really nice way to make something feel new, to really like ramp up the tension harmonically and string it out, and then finally let it release into the chord that everyone's expecting and wanting to hear. And you can do that by yourself on one note. And, it just takes a little bit of getting used to really hold it and sort of squeeze it.
While the melody line continues.
I can think of an example. Walking up Edinburgh City. That's a kind of folk song, just goes from chord 1 to chord 4. But you could go walking up Edinburgh City, the bag of 12 o'clock, and you just stay for hours, and then eventually give them
There's the release.
Yeah. So in that way, I think we can group that under harmonically expressive ways of using rhythm, because we're just extending the duration to build up tension.
Yeah. So the rhythmic density is very sparse.
Well,
I'm sorry, the harmonic density is sparse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's something that I think can be milked very effectively. Another thing that's really, really easy, and you alluded to this like a second ago with note density, is to change the patterning of the notes from section to section. So in Dangerous Woman, Ariana Grande is in 6/8, and she has her verse section has a rhythmic motif that has lots of short notes on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It goes ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. And so she's got these little short eighth notes that are notes 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the full ones. And then when she goes to the chorus, they move from the second to the first beat, and they're longer. So she has a little build up, and she had da 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 da. You make me feel. So I probably got the words wrong. Apologies, Ariana Grande fans, of which I'm sure there are hundreds on the stream. But the same principle. You sort of got these short notes, they're off the beat. And then by the time we get to the chorus, it's moving onto the beat, and the notes are longer, and the effect is of a release. So, and actually, Red Hot Chili Peppers do this a lot as well. They have these da 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 type rhythms in the chorus, and then longer notes in the verse, and then longer notes that release into the chorus. And even though you've heard it 50,000 times, it still feels really good.
There you go, Deanna, with all the examples. She's just a fountain of them. Good idea, Tom Hess.
We knew there was a reason why we wanted her to be here. Exactly.
I got more, but I'm sure I want to make sure I get the most out of what you guys have to say. So
oh no. I mean, this is all. I mean, your explanations of these things are such more concise than I could ever possibly come up with. I'd be fumbling, fishing for examples. It's like, I know what it is. I hear it all the time. If somebody asks me, I could tell you. It's like, what song? Let me think.
You know what? I've never been accused of concision before. That is
no.
today's a good day.
How about you, Tom Hess? Do you have any
well, there's something I was going to add to what Deanna, or build on what Deanna was just talking about. When Deanna started talking, she was referring to when a lyric line or a vocal line comes in. And this is going to, of course, as you pointed out, Mark, this can apply to guitar playing or guitar solos or rhythm playing or whatever. But we're just sticking with the vocal example for now. When discussing where in the measure the line starts, vocal line, guitar melody, whatever it is, you can apply the same idea of not coming in on the downbeat to the end of the phrase, the guitar lick, the vocal line, the melody, or whatever. So let's say we had something really simple. So we've got two measures here. They're both in 4/4 time. Let's say this is just straight eighth notes, so very simple, not very sophisticated, but a simple set of eighth notes. If this was our melody, where would this melody likely end? If it was about to end, where would it end? Would it end here on the last note, on the eighth note of the measure? Probably not. It more likely would end here on the downbeat of measure number 2. So this whole phrase would typically look like this. But we don't have to end it here. We could certainly end it back here, but we could also do this. We can insert, let's say, a rest. That's my hand-drawn symbol for a quarter note rest. And we could finish this phrase over here with a quarter note. So the end of the phrase is interrupted by the rest. So everyone is expecting, you set up a pattern, everyone's expecting this melody line to probably end here. But instead, if you insert a rest, you just don't play anything. Total silence here. And then you give the final note on beat 2. That's a nice unexpected change, and it changes how it feels. So sometimes, like, for example, if you think about a guitar solo or a guitar melody, if this is a guitar lick that's going to end here, it's these 8 notes and then one more, by simply delaying it, you create a massive, and I mean massive, amount of tension by simply not playing where the listener expects the final note, the resolution of all of this to be. Everyone expects it to be here. When you deny them that and stick it over here on beat 2, or you could deny it, you could stick it on, even further. If we made that's a half note rest here, and now we have 2 beats of silence. We've stretched the resolution of this phrase all the way over here. You're creating even more tension because there's a bigger gap here between the phrase and its resolution. So you hear this with singers sometimes. I think probably more than you hear it with guitar players, but that doesn't mean that guitar players have all gotten together and said, you know what? We don't like what those singers are doing over there, so we're not going to use this idea because we think just ending all the phrases on beat 1 is better. That's not how that happened. There's just maybe a little lack of imagination. I'm not criticizing any guitar player in particular or guitar players generally, but singers tend to be better at this in terms of you hear it more commonly than you would a guitar player. But it sounds great when you do that. So, drummers would do this stuff all the time too. I mean, good drummers. I'm sure our buddy Mike does this, or certainly he can, where you've got whatever this is, a B, to fill, whatever. And then the accent, which you may be expecting to hit here, maybe he doesn't give it to you there. And maybe he gives it to you over here. So now the accent happens off the beat or on another beat or whatever. So it's a really cool way to create tension using rhythm without having to change the notes you're playing, how hard you're hitting, the dynamic level, the articulation. Just by using the rhythm differently, you create new interest and some cool tension.
I have seen you do that many times with your guitar in your hand. You just leave them wanting for more.
Yeah,
let them hang.
Make them suffer.
Make them suffer. That's what you say. Make them suffer.
Make them suffer
Yes.
for that last note, and then give it to them when you're ready to give it to them.
Yes, exactly. It works very well for guitar.
Yeah.
I just want to draw everyone's attention specifically to the fact that you talked about using this to increase tension. And I think if basically all the things all of us are saying can be grouped under this idea of what they're contrasting with and how that contrast can violate an expectation, which is tension, creates a sense of tension, and that refreshes your interest as a listener. And it's a somewhat personal balance in that if there's too much violating of your expectations and you don't know what's going on, you lose the thread. But if it's everything is the same, you get bored and you also stop concentrating. So in a way, all of these things that we could talk about are ways of setting up an expectation that something's going to be sequenced in a certain way and then doing something different. And then some of them are obviously going to produce more of an explicit feeling of tension, like the holding out for a really long time to give the note that people are expecting, or the holding out of a chord under a melody when you're expecting the chord to change. Those are kind of slightly more obvious. It's going to build quicker. But that's for anyone who's wanting to group all of the things we're saying into a certain category. This is why it can be really expressive. This is why using these rhythmic techniques creates a feeling of emotional expressiveness in the mood of the music. It's because of how it acts upon the tension and the sense of release of tension or build of it. Without wanting to be reductive, but I think that is fair to say. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah. What was the term used? Defying your sense of expectation or interrupting?
Violating your sense of expectation.
Violating.
Yeah.
Yes, good word. Violating your sense of
I'm pretty sure I stole that phrase from Tom Hess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just to maybe say the same thing that Deanna just said in a little bit different words. Listeners have an expectation about what's coming next based upon what you've already done before. So when you have a pattern, for example, like this, there's a clear expectation that this is either going to continue, more eighth notes over here, or it's going to end right here on the downbeat. That's the expectation. You set up a pattern. The human brain searches for patterns. It's very good at pattern recognition, and it wants to see, it feels satisfied when patterns continue up to a certain point, and then we get bored, right? If we just did this rhythm the entire time, rhythmically speaking, at least, it gets really boring. And now we have to rely heavily on the harmony, the melody, and a bunch of other things to keep the interest of the listener. So when we deny that, we break the pattern and we deny the listener what they expect to hear, that creates interest. And as Deanna said, if we did that too much, if we didn't set up a pattern, or we never give the listener what it is that would satisfy what their expectation is, well, now they're confused. Now they can't latch on to something. So it's a balance between setting up expectations and meeting those expectations sometimes musically, and then denying those expectations other times. It's that balance between giving them enough to latch onto it, but not too much that they get immune or bored to whatever the patterns are. So I see that Joe in the chat asked, can you please demonstrate on guitar the note phrases drawn on the whiteboard? Thank you. Okay, cool, Joe. So let's say that I'll use a different pattern, but I'll use the same idea, okay? All right, so I'll play, let me know if, Mark, if this is too loud, if the guitar's distorting, let me know. But let's say we have this. So I'm playing A minor here. A If I stop there, everyone should be expecting to hear that note come last. Now, if I just stop there, I basically played the equivalent of this. I didn't play eighth notes, and there's more of them, but I basically did this, and then I stopped. I still didn't give you the last note. Okay. Now, if I pause a beat or 2 beats or even an eighth note, we were denying the listener the expectation. They're wanting to hear this. Okay. And we're not giving it to them, at least not in the place where they're expecting to hear it. So they're expecting to hear, and they are hearing, but they're hearing it later. So that's an example where this note would normally be here, where you're denying the listener that final note until some point later in the measure, and that creates additional tension. If we didn't do that, if we just simply played the scale straight and give them the last note, the one they expect when they expect it, it's okay, but there's no rhythmic interest there at all. We just playing the scale, finishing it off, and we're done. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if we did that all the time, it might get boring, at least rhythmically speaking. So that's an example of this. I'm not going to attempt to sing an example. I'm not going to embarrass myself. So the guitar lick is all you got. The scale is all you get.
Cool, very cool. Deanna, it's something that we touched on earlier when I had mentioned to you about the density of the chord changes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I was wondering if we can elaborate on that, if you could speak to that. So for the harmonic rhythm.
Yeah, so that would just be how often the chords are changing. And that sets up an expectation too. So there's lots of songs that operate on a four bar phrase, and where you've got 4 chords that go round and round. And if you were to do that for a section, and then you either stretch them out or you compress them, that would change how it felt. Even the exact same 4 chords. In fact, this is a great exercise if anyone wants to try this at home. Create a 4 bar phrase. And with 1 chord per bar, and then collapse that. So now the 4 chords happen in 2 bars, and stretch it out and see what the effect is on the melodic phrases that you're singing. So an example of this where I think it matches up really well with the tempo of the song is Hallelujah. So, you know, the Leonard Cohen song and just Jeff Buckley, he's got kind of more than 1 chord per bar for most of the verse. And then he slows it down to 1 chord per bar in the chorus. And it's just hallelujah, hallelujah. And that gives that pause for contemplation. Okay, I did not perform it in a very contemplative way, but there's this the whole song is building to that moment of that little, that just like slightly, it's not a big chorus, and it's clearly not kind of a pop song or a pop chorus, but it has a more meditative quality, and slowing down the rate of harmonic change to 1 chord per bar, where it had been 2 chords per bar, or in some cases 3 in the earlier section, really gives it that sort of shimmering contemplative quality. And actually, if I look at the chords, in this key, it's a C and an E minor. So they're not even very different chords. You could extend the argument further in saying it's a change that's minimally changing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, people have heard it all the time. It's just the frequency in which the chords change.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the term harmonic rhythm might seem weird, but everybody's heard it before, you know.
And a great example that everyone will know is blues.
Yes.
You have 4 bars, 2 bars.
Tom Hess.
You stole the thunder again, Deanna. No, I'm joking. Yes, blues is. Go ahead, Deanna. Go ahead. You're right.
Well, it's just that you have 4. A section that has 4 bars, unless it's a quick change blues. Thank you very much. You've got the first 4 chords along the top there. Then we have a change. We have 2 chords, so now 2 bars. So now it's slightly shorter. Then we change back to the first chord, but for only 2 bars. And then the turnaround, you're changing every bar, and that does give you this big push of energy at the end of the blues chord to go around to start again. I'm sure Tom Hess has got more to add to that.
Well, yeah, and you got it exactly right. You start off with, I mean, sometimes this chord is replaced with a 4, but the typical, like the textbook, 12-bar blues, you're going to have, you've got a big section here. So the harmonic rhythm is very slow. Then it speeds up, and then it speeds up again at the end. And there's a reason why the harmonic rhythm speeds up towards the end. And Deanna already talked about it, because it propels you forward back to the beginning, to the resolution, to the 1 chord. Okay. In classical music, you would hear this often before cadence points. So if you had, let's say, a 16 measures section of music, you would very often hear this right before the final cadence, where maybe you had 1 chord per measure. And now you may have 2 chords per measure, or even 4 chords per measure. As you get closer to the cadence, the end of the section, returning from 5 to 1, the 5 chord to the 1 chord, the leading up to that resolution, to the 5 chord, usually that harmonic rhythm is going to come faster and faster, because it builds more tension by itself. So this isn't really, harmonic rhythm has the word rhythm in it, but we're not actually playing any faster. Although you could play fast, you could change the rhythm. But if you kept the rhythm, 8th notes, quarter notes, 16th notes, the same, but the rate at which the chords change, that rhythm, the harmonic rhythm, speeds up, and it creates a lot of tension, even if you're not accenting with dynamics or in other ways. So it's a very useful tool, been around for centuries, very effective.
Yeah, for people who are more classic rock people, Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix, the whole first half, the chord changes are 4 beats or whatever it is, and then towards the second half, it's just 2 beats, and he just 2 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats, and it has this sense of movement. It doesn't come back to the 1. It actually ends up going to the 7, I think, for the last chord. But the point is that it's just kind of going and it's trudging along. And just by cutting those chord changes, the amount of time you play them in half, it really gives the sense of propelling you towards the end of that whole chord progression. So if anybody's familiar with Little Wing, classic example, it's a very long chord progression, but you definitely feel it. You definitely feel it. And nothing changes. Rhythmically, nothing changes, like you said. It's still just quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note rhythm. There's nothing weird or abstract going on. It's just the amount of time that they spend on the chords. It just gets cut in half for, I don't know, whatever, 4, 5, 6 chords or whatever. And it really gives you this sense of feeling like you're getting moved away from where you just were, and it's taking you someplace else. So very effective.
Before we move on or continue, I wanted to address the question that came a while ago from Axstream Guitar. He says, can this strategy work somewhere in the middle of the pattern as well? Now, I believe what the strategy he's referring to is not the harmonic rhythm. I think that comment came before, when we were talking about delaying the gratification of the last note. So we had I think when I played on my guitar, we played the scale, and then we denied the listener the last note when they expected to hear it, the last note of the phrase. So I think that question is referring to that. And he's asking, can you do it in the middle of the pattern? Yeah, you can do it anywhere you want. It's typically most effective at the end. Because why? Because you have more time to establish the pattern or establish the expectation in the listener's mind. So because there's more time to establish the pattern, it's clearly there. The expectation gets hot. The longer the pattern continues, the greater the expectation is in the listener's mind that this is going to continue, or it's going to resolve itself where it's expected to be resolved. So if you shorten it, if you take the if you deny them what it is that they're expecting and bring it earlier, you can do that as long as the time between the beginning and that moment in time is enough to establish the pattern in their mind so that they have an expectation. If you bring it too close to the beginning, you can still do it. It's just that you're not denying an expectation because they don't have an expectation yet. They haven't been able to latch on to a pattern at that point. So you can do anything you want. And even if they don't latch onto the pattern and have an expectation, your idea might sound cool anyway for other reasons. But the point is, if you want to set up an expectation and deny it, they have to perceive the pattern and have an expectation in order for that to work in the way that we just talked about. Cool.
Very cool. Yes, you nailed it. He commented that's exactly what he was referring to.
Yeah, cool.
Very cool. Actually, really good question. Thank you
I've
for
got-
that.
Very good question.
I've got one thing to add on the harmonic rhythm thing. The David Bowie song Changes is a great example of this because it has a sort of one chord per bar, quite mellow intro. And then chorus stays one chord per bar, and verse stays one chord per bar, chorus gets 2 chords per bar, and eventually he gets into this. I just did them wrong, it's not that order. Time may change me, but I can't trace time. So he goes to 1 chord per beat, and then we have a little pause, and then the song cranks up again. And all that variety in the rhythm just makes the whole thing flow in this really, I don't know, musically agreeable way. And it's every time we get one of those little changes, it perks up our attention again. And actually in Let It Be, is it Let It Be by the Beatles? Da, 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 da. There's a similar thing. There's a similar little chord movement where he just does a pattern that's what goes from 2 chords per bar to doing like 1 chord per beat. And then there's a little tiny pause before we get going again. So he's both compressing the chord changes into a shorter time and then having a little tiny breather. And I think that works really well.
Yes, it does work very well. Okay, so now seeing how you still have your guitar in your hand, because I know that you're definitely going to have examples of this, let's talk about rhythmic density.
Okay. So I deployed my main example, which was the Ariana Grande. But I mean, almost all, like, I'm pretty sure if we looked at the top 5, we would find a lot, especially in rap tunes, because they've got, like, they're delivering lots of words during the chorus, and then they will sometimes have little sung bits in the in the choruses. But essentially, the more something's subdivided, it kind of sounds faster. We have more of an impression of time moving, and when something when the notes are longer and they last for longer, we have more of a feeling of space. So that contrast between things being busy and things being spacious is also something that we can deploy to musical effect for contrast. And you can have, it could apply to what the melody's doing, it could apply to what the guitar parts are doing, it could apply to what somebody else in the band is doing. It could, you know, I'm sure if you've got a lineup where you've got bass and drums and guitar, you can definitely do this quite easily without needing to do musically really sophisticated things. You know, your drummer can come in with one thing, and your bass player can come in with, you know, if your drummer's doing quarter notes to begin with, and your bass player can come in with eighth notes, and then your drummer can add in hi-hats, and then you might come in with like a long sustained guitar chord. And so you can build up a texture using those contrasting rhythms very easily. If you're doing it by yourself and you're on your own, you can still do things in a sequence, because every time you play one rhythm, that is hanging around in the memory of the people listening. And when you do another rhythm next, there's a sort of mind echo of what they've just heard. And so you can create like almost imperceptible but effective by sequencing different parts and different subdivisions. So, I mean, quite a nice exercise to try this out is to play with note length and set yourself a little task to create a motif that's got a lot of long notes, or that has 2 long notes and a short note, or 2 short notes and a long note, and experiment with bringing that in on different beats of the bar, and then maybe do the inverse of it. If you had short note, long note, short note, then perhaps have 3 short notes or something for a different section, and then you'll really get a feeling of how that tends to influence how it sounds. It's very easy. I've always been interested in having lots of chords, and sometimes when you have a lot of songs in a row that have a lot of chords, it's a bit indigestible for the listener. And there was one particular song where I had tons of chords, and it still sounded like a bit monotonous, and I couldn't figure out why. And I realized it was because I had the exact same da 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 kind of 8th note rhythm that was driving both the melody of the chorus and the melody of the verse, and it just was too repetitive. And because rhythm's such a powerful element. Despite all the variety in other places, it still was feeling a little bit plodding. So even if you just audit what you've written, or you audit what is happening in terms of the note spacing in your favorite songs, you'll start getting a sense of what appeals to you rhythmically, and then you can use those principles to recreate them in the things that you want to do.
Very cool. Tom Hess, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to Deanna mentioned something fairly quickly, and I want to just make sure that everyone was able to really hear that and think about it. So rhythmic density is about how much you take a beat and divide it. Okay, it's not really about tempo. So tempo is the speed of the beat, how fast beats go by. Okay, that's what tempo is. The speed, the definition of tempo is the speed of the beat. Okay, rhythmic density really is more about divisions. If you've got a beat, a pulse that's going like this, how many rhythmic events happen in between those beats or within the whole measure? So I've drawn out here a couple of measures. Here we have quarter notes. Okay, so this is a fairly thin rhythmic density, not very dense. These beats are not being divided. Okay, here we have eighth notes, and here we're dividing the beat into two parts. Okay, so now the rhythmic density has just doubled. And over here we've got 16th notes. So now we're dividing the beat into four parts. So it sounds like we're getting faster, but the tempo has not changed. The speed of the beat is exactly the same. Let's say it's 100 beats per minute or whatever it is, but the divisions are getting more. We're dividing the beat into smaller and smaller parts. So of course that means we're playing faster notes, but that doesn't mean the tempo is any faster. It is not. Okay. So one other thing that Deanna said is that when you're playing by yourself, you can certainly play a rhythm like this, and you can increase or decrease the rhythmic density by simply dividing the beat into smaller and smaller parts, or bigger parts if you want to go the other way. But when you're playing in a band, you can have a situation where every individual player is playing with a thin rhythmic density. No one is playing 16th notes. No one's playing very fast. They could all be playing this, but you can create an overall very thick, very dense rhythmic density if you simply displace this by, let's say, a 16th note. So let's say the drummer is playing this, and let's say a guitar player is playing essentially the same thing, but it's shifted over by a 16th note. So they're still playing the equivalent of quarter notes, but it's happening here. It's happening after those little dots. It's happening after the downbeat. So this is the E of one. So 1E, 2E, 3E. Then maybe another player is playing on the and they're only playing the equivalent of quarter notes. Okay. They're just playing on, it's syncopated. They're playing on the ands of the beats. Okay, so everybody could be playing the equivalent of a quarter note, but you could create this feel. It's just that every one of these rhythmic events could be happening by a different person in the band. Okay, so in other words, everyone's playing slow, but the overall effect is something faster. Does that make sense? Let me know in the chat if that makes sense. I want to make sure that everyone is clear on that. There's a little time delay, so it'll take a moment before they actually heard what I just said and write it in the chat if it's clear or not. But that's it's something that you can do, and Deanna alluded to it, but I wanted to just sort of write it out because it's a really cool idea what she was sharing. One other thing, I don't want to hog up all the time here, but one other thing that I wanted to talk about today at some point, and maybe this is a good spot, is rubato. So you can take rubato to the extreme where you create the illusion of more, well, it's not even an illusion, it's actual more rhythmic density by speeding up and slowing down. So for example, I'll play a tune that some of you know, and I'll exaggerate it. There's rubato in this tune, but not to the extreme that I'm going to play it. Let's say we take this. bonus points for the first person who writes in the chat what I just played. 1982, I think, was the year that came out. Anyway, the point is, the tempo isn't changing, but I'm stretching the time. I'm pushing forward, playing faster, more rhythmic density, and then pulling back. So we're playing with density through the use of rubato, where, yeah, okay, there we got Diary of a Madman. That is correct. That is correct. 82, Ozzy. That's right. Okay, Rick's got it as well. Cool. So you can take this, and it creates a lot of additional tension. If we played it straight eighth notes. Let's try that again. It's cool because the chords themselves are very cool. It is cool. But in my opinion, at least, I think this is cooler. You get the idea. It's because, well, two things are really added here. There's more dynamics here, getting louder and softer, but it's the rhythm. It's the speeding up and pulling back. This is known as rubato. And that adds way more interest and tension. It makes the emotions that already exist in those chords, and it exaggerates them. It's like plugging the chords into an amplifier and turning the amp up. In an emotional amplifier. That's a good way that I think about rubato and dynamics. They amplify the emotions that are already there in the harmony. It's a very, very cool effect. And Randy Rhoads used it very well in that tune. He didn't apply vibrato to the extreme that I just played it, but it's still cool. Maybe he would have thought that would be too much or obnoxious or whatever. So maybe he dialed it down a bit, and that's cool too. But it's something that's fairly easy to do, and it relates to rhythmic density, even though all I really played was eighth notes, but it's more free time, it's more rubato. So it creates density through stretching time.
Yeah. So you just mentioned free time, which is something that's actually different, even though you were playing with more freely with time using rubato. Can you explain the difference between rubato and free time?
Yeah, well, rubato is essentially where you're still going to think about it as landing on your feet. Okay, so you're jumping off, you may be speeding up and slowing down, but you're kind of coming back to what the original tempo was, or the original pace is. With free time, you wouldn't necessarily do that. You might speed up, slow down. There's no real tempo in mind. You're just freely playing whatever. It would be difficult to lock down and determine what is the tempo here. Well, we don't know because it's kind of all over the place. With what I was just playing, the Diary of a Madman tune, we can kind of pin it down. You can't pin it down through the divisions because they're speeding up and slowing down. But you can link it to the harmonic rhythm. When the chords change, that's pretty regular. And it tends to be in rubato. So free time is just all bets are off. All you do whatever you want. It's more free than rubato. So you have more freedom with free time than you would with rubato, but the advantage of rubato over free time, the pro, if you're making a pros and cons list, is that with rubato, there's more for the listener to latch on to. Okay, there is a longer pattern of time that is, there's longer expectation in the listener's mind. Now, in between each measure, they may not know what you're going to do. How fast are you going to speed up? How slow are you going to pull back? They may not know that, which is what holds the interest. That's what makes it sound so interesting, is they know there's a pattern there, but they're unsure how you're going to manipulate it. In free time, there's really no pattern to latch onto. So you run the risk of losing the listener's interest in a sense because they have nothing rhythmically to latch to. Their brain is seeking a pattern and cannot find it. That's the issue. Not that it's bad, just stating a fact of the differences.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification, because I know people get those two things confused.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
I think
Cool.
the rubato thing is definitely something solo performers can exploit, and exploit more than they probably do. If you're playing by yourself, you lack the resources of a band to create some of these contrasts, but you can do as much rubato as you want because you're not going to throw off other people you're playing with.
Yeah, in an ensemble type setting, going back to classical era or romantic era, where you would find it much more in the romantic period, you're relying on the conductor. So the conductor is conducting the entire orchestra to use rubato based upon how he's conducting the beat. But it's everyone has to be paying attention. Everyone has to really be listening and watching that conductor. In a band, you generally don't have a conductor, at the front of the stage conducting the band, but someone, maybe it's the guitar player, maybe it's the drummer, is leading that. So often, like you hear it at the end of rock tunes or whatever, if you look at live performances, where everything kind of slows down, especially like the last song of the night, and there's this big bombastic ending, right? And the drummer's doing all the accents and the fills and all that stuff, and everyone is or ought to be looking at the drummer, so when that last hit's coming, because you're not going to guess that correctly. If you're looking at someone in the crowd, you're going to screw that up. So you need to be watching the drummer because he's the timekeeper, and he's going to tell you when the hits, and you have to match your hit to whatever he's doing. So in that, the drummer fills the role that a conductor would when time is being sped up or slowed down or stretched or whatever.
Yes.
But theoretically, anyone could do that. So in the case of Yngwie Malmsteen and his band, he is the conductor. So when he is not looking at the drummer, okay, yeah. He tells the drummer, "You look at me." But the role is the same, and he shows visually when he holds the guitar for the last hit or whatever. They're all cueing on him. So it can be done with an ensemble and a band as long as everyone is aware of what's happening and they're paying attention and they're watching.
Yeah, you could even see if you watch bands live, that last hit when everybody's looking for the drummer and the drummer's stretches it out even further and kind of like playing a joke on the guys. You can see like people smiling, like, okay, where's it coming? And when's it coming? I mean, you can
fake out.
Yeah, you can see the interaction between the band members. Like, it's just kind of like pulling the leg, an extra long hold or something. I mean, because, yeah, he's the one who's in charge. If you pay attention, you can see it a lot because they're just goofing around on stage with each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Cool. So there's one big topic that I'd like to cover quickly before we run out of time. And that particular one is changing time signatures in songs.
I was really hoping you'd say that.
Of course. I had to save the best for last. I knew you wanted to talk about this. So I know it's a very effective way to create emotion and everything like that. Okay. So, Deanna, I know you have tons of examples. I just know, for example, off the top of my head, all you have to do is listen to the Beatles. It just happens all the time, almost everywhere, it seems like, and then another big one in rock was Money by Pink Floyd. That one goes through some key signature changes right in the middle of the song, parts to part, and then it comes back. But if you would like to talk about that, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm going to deploy concision, but essentially, if you go from a time signature that is not symmetrical, like 7/8, into 4/4, there is going to be a feeling of going from something that's a bit constrained and compressed and uneven to something that's now even. And so that inherently will give you a tension to release feeling. And it's the reason I really wanted this to come up was because I'm keen to know from Mark in a minute how we can train ourselves to be able to move freely between time signatures, because this is where the familiarity trap can really get songwriters. If you're used to playing in 4/4, maybe a bit of 3/4, you're going to always tend to create melodies and chord progressions in those time signatures, because you're not going to be able to execute something else. And if you're taking an approach to songwriting, which is that you're sitting at your guitar having a go at something or fiddling around, you're only going to come up with ideas that you can already play. It's just told me that I've got to reload the page. Hang on a second. Am I back?
You're still I never lost you.
Okay, I've just got a weird try reload. Anyway, I'm going to carry on. So I'll rely on you to let me know if something happens, but I just got a weird pop-up to tell me to reload. Right, so uneven time signature to even time signature will always give you that tension to release vibe. But as songwriters, one of our challenges may be that if we are only writing with our instrument, working within the confines of what we can already do technically, we're leaving a whole lot of stuff on the table. So that begs two questions. Firstly, how do we organize our thinking compositionally so that we can explore those things? And secondly, how do we build our skills technically so that we can actually execute those things? So one of my favorite songs of mine is called The Starting Gun, and it has a 7/8 verse that goes into a 4/4 chorus. And I only wrote it because I had to do a technical exercise in guitar college to write some riffs in 7/8. And so I sat there for ages writing a riff, and the riff goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it does that, and it goes. Then there's singing over the top. Now, when it came to writing that riff and then training myself to sing over the top, I did not have. I'm sure that this is not the quickest, best way to go about it. I basically sat there for hours, probably years, till I could actually do it. So, but it can be done. So I'm wondering if Mark has any great ideas on what technical things that we can do as musicians to train ourselves to be able to have greater rhythmic flexibility in our playing. And I would also love to know Tom Hess's ideas.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, just to get your head around the playing in 7 thing, the easiest way to do it is just to count by 4, then 3. Or by 3, then 4, so you have a total 7. Don't try to count through 7 the whole way. That'll screw you up. If you're really trained to play in 4/4 time, everybody knows what a waltz is, and everybody knows what 4/4 time is. Just combine the two together. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you could reverse it whichever way. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. That is actually the easiest way just to get your mind around it. And I think if you were just to simply start with something as easy as just taking basic chords and just arpeggiating them and just playing them in 7, and then getting used to changing on the when you're supposed to change and not changing, in 4/4 time, that would be the easiest way just to get you acclimated to feeling playing in 7. And then from there, once you can do that, once you've internalized that, then I think it's a lot easier just to expand that into whether it's chord changes or coming up with a guitar riff or something like that. But you really need to be able to internalize that first, break out of your 4/4 mode, and then it'll be easier to expand. Tom Hess, what you got?
Yeah, I was just going to build off of one of the things you said about taking a chord and arpeggiating it. And I think this is very useful for people that are not used to counting. First of all, if you're not used to counting, get used to it. But if you're not used to it, or you find it's weird or hard or anything like that, just take a chord. I'm going to play a C sharp minor 7 here. This is just a power chord with the pinky finger. And then top 2 strings are open. And what I'm going to do is I'm starting on string number 5, and I'm going to pick 5 strings that way. So I'm picking strings 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Now, if I do that and don't allow the last string, the first string, to ring out longer than the others, I'm now playing in 5/8 time because I'm playing 5/8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, Don't do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Don't let this last longer than the others. So if you just create this pattern, you're playing in 5/8 time, and it's really easy. You don't have to count anything. You just play your 5 strings and immediately start the pattern over again. If you wanted to play, let's say, in 7/8 time, you just create a little picking pattern to get used to 7/8 time. Create a little picking pattern that ends up being 7/8 notes. For example, sticking with the same chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm starting on string 5, and I'm picking all the strings this way, strings 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Then after that, I'm picking string 2 and 3 afterwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's an excerpt from a tune of mine that's in 7/8 time. But it's really just that little pattern. Here I'm starting on string 6 and skipping string 5. But it's all 7. So you can take any chord, you can take a C chord or a G chord or whatever, and just create a pattern of 5 straight 5/8 notes, or 7 or 9 or any other number. And you get used to simply playing that pattern, and then 5/8 or 7/8 or 11/8 or whatever, 13/8 doesn't feel weird. Let me show you a 13/8 pattern. It's really easy. Using the same chord I was playing before. This is the C sharp bar chord. Power chord with the little finger on there too. Top 2 strings are open. You pick 5, starting on string 5, you pick 5 strings this way. And so that's 5. And now the next pattern, you start also on the 5th string, pick 4 strings this way, and then 4 strings that way, like this. So that's 8. And that should feel very comfortable for you because you're probably used to doing that anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So then you put the 2 patterns together. The 5 pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the 8 pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can think of this as what's called mixed meter, 5/8 and 4/4, or 5/8 and 8/8. Or I think of it as 13 because the whole cycle is going to be 13/8 notes long. Another excerpt from another tune of mine, but it's basically just alternating 5 and 8. It's very simple. It's all 8th notes. There's nothing tricky in there at all. We're just taking all these 8th notes and we're grouping them in groups of 5 and then groups of 8. Or you can think of it as a group of 5 and 2 groups of 4. So, yeah. So I'll stop there with the examples for now. Mark, you're muted, buddy.
We had a question in regards to this. So before we move on, are you familiar with this piece of music by Joe Satriani?
Yeah, I've heard it. I don't know how to play it, but yeah, I vaguely remember hearing it. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember the melody, not the rhythm part.
All right. Well, there you go. I just figured, seeing how it's relevant, if you knew the song more intimately off the top of your head, you could answer the question.
No, I'd have to hear it again, and then I could tell you.
Okay. So, Deanna, you actually had something too that you wanted to talk about as far as a great example of accenting contrasting time signatures.
Yeah. So This, I actually don't think it changes time signatures, but it has like a 6/4 feeling. It's the Ella Fitzgerald version of Caravan, and so there's this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feeling, and it goes night and stars above that shine so bright. Sets that up, and then it goes into the chorus. That shines upon my caravan. Then it just goes into much more of a regular swing feel. But so it's going that bam, bam. It's implying this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we don't speed up or slow down, but it goes into that. And it took me forever to kind of get that and sing it and change to the other bit. I haven't got a good, fast way of being able to teach other people how to do that yet. But that's really cool as well. You just change where the accents are. And you're not speeding up or slowing down, but this feels kind of pretty tense. Especially because she's kind of still singing 4/4. So there's a bit of a fight between the phrasing of the vocal and the accents there. And then when you get into the little refrain bit at the end and the chorus, I guess what you'd call the chorus is just a sort of straight swing. Well, a more kind of standard 4/4 swing rhythm.
Very cool. You are, Deanna, you are the human jukebox of examples. You really are. You know, I mean, a lot of it is if you play and you sing. So, I mean, you understand how all of this works. You know, you just mentioned briefly on having contrasting, the rhythm of the music is contrasting the time signature of the vocals. Time signature of the music and the time signature of the vocals, and they're laying on top of each other, and it's creating a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool.
Polymeter.
You know, yeah. If you just check out that Ella Fitzgerald version of Caravan, you can kind of hear that there's loads of rhythmic tension that builds up, and the notes are long, and then there's this real feeling of things moving forward when it gets to the into the refrain and into the chorus. So it's just a great example of some of the things we've been talking about. And she's got these long notes that are contrasting with the shorter notes, and they're kind of placed in a slightly syncopated way. So this is a really satisfying kind of rhythmic tension. But I was gonna sort of conclude the thing about how you escape from the familiarity trap purely for songwriters with perhaps the suggestion that you basically do certain things on paper. So you challenge yourself to write certain things on paper, and you don't have to be like great at music theory for this. You can just count out 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, whatever, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or whatever numbers you want to work with, and then put in where you're going to try the notes and experiment. So that's the only way, and this will feel more laborious, but it's the only way. I would never have written some of what are now my favorite songs if I'd stayed within the things that I could actually already execute. So you've got to find some way of breaking yourself out of that. And there are lots of programs that allow you to experiment positioning things, even if you can't actually play them. But thanks to the techniques that you have both shared, there are also ways that you can train yourself to feel comfortable with those time signatures and then actually execute the things that you've done on paper and audition those ideas.
Yeah, well, actually, that was going to be before you started, I was going to say, you know, there's so many things that we talked about. And so do you have any advice for people who are going to try to implement this stuff? And I think you pretty much said it. You know, I mean, you could, even if you can't execute it yourself, you could use other software tools, rhythmic things to even just to hear what it sounds like and then learn it later.
Exactly. And I think if you have the intention that the area of things that you can do, either just playing them or playing them and singing at the same time, is going to be whatever size it is right now. But you're kind of over time working to extend that. And one of the ways you're going to work to extend that is to pick an area to focus on. So you might pick, okay, I'm going to go between an uneven and an even time signature. And that's going to be my focus for the next while. And so I'm going to maybe write some riffs and little motifs in 5/8, or some chord progressions in 5/8 and 7/8. And I'm going to contrast going between those and 4/4. And that's just the thing you're working on at that time. So I think pick a thing and stick with it long enough till you've got something that you've done with that thing, because then you've assimilated it.
Right. Now I know, Tom Hess, you have something that you have a video, correct?
Yeah, which thank you. Just put it in the chat
Yep.
for everyone. Yeah, it's a YouTube video on cool and easy ways to play an odd meter, and it's based upon the example that I gave of just taking some simple chords and some simple picking patterns that don't require you to really do any counting or any thinking at all. And I'm not implying that it's bad to count or think. I like thinking and I like counting for other reasons. But if it's new, if playing an odd meter feels weird, and it did to me when I first learned it. I used to take lessons from George Bellis many, many years ago in the early 90s for 5 or 6 years. And he's the one who really got me into odd meter stuff. And a lot of our lessons were, compositional based things and odd meter stuff when I was taking lessons at his house many years ago. And so I had a really hard time following the stuff that George was playing and writing. We would play together, and I had a hard time keeping up. I'm just talking about the time signature stuff. And then I realized, I'm having a hard time counting 15, 16 and crazy time signatures like that. So making these little patterns was a way for me to get into the odd meter stuff where playing in groups of 5 or 7 or whatever, it didn't feel weird anymore. And then it made it much easier for me to later be able to count out complex rhythms and large time signatures, 15, 16, 17, crazy stuff. And the ones that change a lot. Because my background was, 4/4, mostly 6/8, stuff like that. So it felt weird at first. So this was a way that got me into it that allowed me to make it seem not complicated or not feel weird to play, which it did at that time. It felt really weird to play in anything that wasn't 6/8 or 4/4 or maybe 3/4. But now, 7/8, 9/8, 11/8 just feels just as natural to me as anything else does. It's not any more complicated. It's not advanced or complicated at all. It's just a little different, and it's just something you just need to get used to. So that video might help you for those who struggle with odd meter and find it hard to count out and keep track of what's what. This is a really easy way to get started. And then from there, you want to transition into, on really understanding what's going on and counting it out, and then feeling where accents fall in 7/8 or 5/4 or whatever. And it's usually groups of 2s and 3s put together, or 2s, 3s, and 4s. Occasionally there might be a group of 5, but it's rare that you're going to have, a true group of 11 with no accents in between to divide that group of 11 16th notes or whatever. That's really uncommon. So you're very likely not going to be counting much past 4, maybe 5 most of the time, which makes it easy.
I like easy. I like easy. Well, listen, I want to thank both of you guys very much for coming on and taking a part of this. This was actually absolutely fantastic. I know, Deanna, you have something that for people for free. And I was wondering if you'd like to talk about that. You're muted.
The thing that I have is not the thing that is on your screen.
No. My bad. I am so sorry. I have the wrong image. My bad. Well, would you like to talk about it? Because I might be able to get it pulled up in time.
So I have a little guide to lyric writing, my 5 top tips for lyric writing. And this has lots of ideas in it that I wished I'd known when I started out. I pretty much started out writing lyrics 20 years ago the way that I imagined people wrote lyrics, which is to sit down and just write line 1 and then line 2 and then try and keep going. It turns out that there are loads of better approaches to this. And just because you might not have necessarily, there's basically a whole load of cultural nonsense that we learn about what songwriting is. And most of that tends to be around, I just have this like burning urge to express myself, and the first time I do that, it's going to come out in these great words, and I'm just going to be able to fill a page instantly with this fabulous lyrics. And if I can't, then maybe that means that I shouldn't be doing songwriting. But this is like nonsense. We don't think this about anything else. Everything else that we do in life, we understand that we need some help. Like I didn't think I could get in a car and know how to drive the car without lessons. But I also did not think that I needed to be a genius to pass my driving test. We kind of expect that we can get this car from A to B with the right instruction. You can get your song from A to B in a way that is way more effective than just guesswork, using a few very simple principles that you can definitely understand. And if I'd had these at the start, I would have made much quicker progress and written songs that I was happier with much sooner. So this has just got all the things I wish I'd known, and a little bit of a guide to what exercises you can do to help your lyric writing improve, to practice your lyric writing, which is also not something I really ever thought about when I started out. So you lyricists among you may be ahead of me on that score, but I think there'll be some things that you may not have come across if you're reasonably new to lyric writing that will save you some time.
Okay, so is there any way that we can put this in the chat, or could you send me a message?
I can put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat right now. Here we go.
Okay, hold on a second. I am actually going to do this in real time. So that way it's going to be in the chat for everybody. And also, I am going to put it up on the screen right now.
Oh, look at that. Isn't that beautiful?
There you go. So we're going to give it plenty of screen time because I gypped you. I had our friend Simon Candy's old image loaded up here into the software program. So make sure you go to songwritinglessonsonline.com/5 ways to write lyrics, all hyphenated. Very good. I appreciate that. All right. Everybody should really check that out. So now I actually have something for those people who are looking more guitar based specific rhythm guitar stuff. I have the beginner's guide to adding lead guitar elements to your rhythm playing. So basically all this is simply, if you ever heard people playing chords and they're kind of tying these chords together with single notes, this is the absolute beginner's guide to be able to get you to do that. It's actually not that hard to do. It's all based off scales. You don't have to learn scales to do this, but the notes that you're going to be pulling from are just coming from scales, and they are the correct notes that are going to sound good in between your chord changes. So if you have any interest, if you ever wondered where those things come from, how do they know which notes to pick? This will definitely take you right from ground zero, so to speak. You don't have to have any knowledge at all. I'll tell you exactly which notes you need to pick in between what chords to play, and you're going to be sounding like a pro in no time. So that's at rhythmguitarlessons.net/PRO. So once again, Tom Hess, Deanna, I want to thank you guys so much for doing this today. I think this 3-2 double guest thing was fantastic. Thanks for coming up with this idea, Tom Hess, to have us do this. And I'm actually looking forward to do this again.
Yeah, very cool. And thank you to everyone who contributed in the comments and asked some good questions. And one more thing that I just wanted to add here, the free resources that Deanna and Mark Turco just shared with you, I've actually seen both of them. I went through them. I read every word. They're both really, really, really good. And I can say that firsthand because I have them both and I've seen them. And I can tell you that they're real good. Not to mention they're free. So go get them.
Free's good. All right, well, until the next time, thank you, everybody. Keep playing. Have fun. Take care.